Hello, this is Manoj Kulwal, and I will be your trainer for this very special course on operational risk management. This course is an initiative by Risk Spotlight to raise £10,000 by 31st December 2017 for Save the Children charity. This is a 3-hour course which will provide an introduction to the discipline of operational risk management for professionals who are new to this discipline. All great initiatives require partners, and on this initiative, we are being supported by 3 great partners: the Risk Universe magazine, Exactium, which provides risk management software, and Eureka Financial, which provides training on risk management topics. After completing this course, if you find value in what you have learned, then please donate an amount of your choice to the Save the Children charity on the link provided on this slide. Even £1 of donation would make a big difference. Here is the structure of our course. I will first provide a brief introduction to myself and Risk Spotlight, my company. Then we will go and get an introduction to the concept of uncertainty. And then we will look at some of the common definitions of risk. And then we will go and look at the definition of operational risk and try to understand the key aspects of that definition. Then we will go and look at some practices on how you can identify relevant operational risks within your organization, and then also identify existing risk treatment, which are also sometimes referred to as controls in some organization. And then you can take a small break at the middle of the course and pause the video. And then we will go into the risk analysis aspect of the course, where we will look at how do you actually measure risk in terms of likelihood or financial impact. And then we will look at the concept of incidents and issues and action plans, which are very critical in terms of monitoring risk and learning from failures in risk management. And then we will look at the concept of monitoring indicators. So that's where you can set up risk indicators or control indicators to monitor the risk on an ongoing basis. And in the end, we will cover the topic of various operational risk stakeholders who are involved in management of operational risk in a typical organization. So first, I would like to just give you a quick introduction about me. I'm co-founder and chief risk officer at Risk Spotlight. We are a specialist risk management company based in UK, but we do provide our products and services to clients globally. Personally, I focus on the areas of operational risk management, ERM frameworks and processes, risk appetite, and then also on the implementation of GRC or enterprise risk management software. I'm also a trainer on operational risk topic for various organizations such as British Bankers Association, Eureka Financials, and for ISO 31000, I also am a certified trainer from Global Institute of Risk Management Standards. If you're interested in looking at some of the articles I have published for the Risk Universe magazine, then please do check my LinkedIn profile. And I have also published various videos on risk management topics on YouTube. So if you want to look for those videos, then search for the term Risk Spotlight on YouTube. About Risk Spotlight, we provide 3 areas of products and services. Our first key area is content, where firstly we provide a fully populated library of 125 operational risks for small and medium-sized banks. And in this library, with each of the 125 operational risks, we provide a list of common causes, controls, impacts, early signs of risk, and key risk indicators. So organizations which are just starting out on their operational risk journey and do not necessarily have a fully completed operational risk library can utilize our library as a great starting point to develop their own in-house library. The second key content offering we provide is the Operational Risk News Portal, where if you are doing a risk assessment on a particular operational risk, then you should typically look at what's happening on that risk inside your organization, which of course you will already have information about. But good risk management says that you should also look at what's happening outside your organization on that particular risk. And that's the point where our subscribers can use our news portal, where on a daily basis we have a team of analysts who scan the news sources, and if they find articles related to specific operational risks like bribery or conduct risks or cybercrime, then they would tag those articles against those risks so you can get up-to-date information on the most recent relevant news articles on specific operational risk, and that information can be then very useful for you to do more informed risk assessments or developing scenarios. We also provide consulting services, which is our second line of business, around operational risk framework and processes, around risk appetite, for organizations which are starting out implementation of any GRC software or operational risk software. We also support those organizations in terms of documenting and analyzing their business requirements so that those business requirements can be implemented into the software. And then we also are partners, with many GRC software vendors, so we understand their strengths and weaknesses, and we can utilize that knowledge to also help our clients select the right GRC software for the requirements. And we can also come and help do independent facilitation, where if you're running risk identification workshops or risk assessment workshops and you require an independent facilitator to come and facilitate those workshops, then we can also provide services around that. And those services can be provided either sort of face-to-face, or we can also provide those services online, using WebEx or GoToMeeting type web tools. Our third line of business is training, where we do provide public courses, where I teach public courses for various organizations I talked about earlier, but then we also develop customized courses where we can take a risk management framework of an organization and then also tailor-make our out-of-the-box content we provide with the risk management framework of our client organization. And then the sort of topics we cover are risk and control assessments, developing a robust control environment, operational risk appetite, how to run risk management workshops, and then also the topic of ISO 31000, which is a widely adopted international standard on risk management.
Before we start with our first course topic, I just want to highlight that this course was first conducted as a live training on 4th of August 2016. As part of that live training, there were 34 participants who participated in the course and who got involved in the various exercises and the discussion through a chat feature. And due to data privacy restrictions, the chat and the names of the participants will not be shared on the screen. So during the course, you may see some sections where I will be interacting with the participants and I will be sharing my notes, but you may not necessarily be able to see the comments being posted by the participants during the live course.
So let's first start with this concept of uncertainty before we go into the concept of risk and then go into the concept of operational risk. So uncertainty, sort of a definition, there are lots of definitions out there, but just for this course, the definition I would use is that it's a state where we don't know whether something could happen, and if it could happen, it would result in some consequences. And then we only care about those consequences if it may influence, some objective we are trying to achieve. Okay, so there is an element of not knowing about what could happen in the future, and so that's a key element here. That when we're talking about risk management, or when we are talking about risks, we are always talking about something which could happen in the future. So risks cannot be in the past. Risks cannot be things which are already happening. Risks are always we are talking about the future, and then in order to understand that future, the concept we need to grasp is the concept of uncertainty, and that's what we'll spend the next few slides on. So I've broken down the three elements of uncertainty then we will use for this course. So something could happen, is an element. So let's say we can call that as a potential event which could happen in the future. And then we only care about that potential event if it would result in some consequences. And then again, we only care if those consequences are important for our objectives. So if you are a bank in US and there is going to be a hurricane in Thailand potentially in the next 3 months, you may not care that much about that uncertainty, because yes, it's an event, it will have some consequences, but it does not have any consequences on your objective. But of course, if you have a supplier who's based there, then you may want to care about that uncertainty or about that potential event. because it will then impact your objective. Okay, so we'll break down sort of those three elements and we'll expand into that further. So let me just give some examples then in terms of uncertainty, and then also we want to compare it to certainty and what is the difference. And at the end is where we've highlighted. So uncertainty is anything which could happen in the future where you're not 100% sure. So there is a little bit of a doubt, or we're not sure, whether it would happen or not. While certainty is where we are 100% sure, so there is no ambiguity, there is no doubt. So examples of uncertainties may be, will I get a promotion, at the end of the year? Will our customers recommend products to their friends and families, and help us increase the sales of our product? If we are running a project, one of the uncertainties, could we lose some of our key people while we are on the project, which may then end up in delaying the project timelines. Another uncertainty could be, are our salespeople, they're trying to understand the needs of the customers before they recommend the product, or are they, just trying to make the sales numbers and they don't really care whether the customer wants the credit card product or the mortgage product or the insurance product? They will, sell the product to the customer, just to achieve their sales objective. So those are all examples of uncertainty where we cannot be, sort of 100% sure that whether those things could happen or not happen in the future. While on the other side, you have examples of certainties, so sun rises in the east, sets in the west. Everyone has 24 hours in a day. 2 times 2 will always be 4. 500 divided by 10, will always be 50. Light will, light travels faster than sound is what that should say. So if we sort of look at this world, then risk management is everything then on the left-hand side. So if something is certain, then as risk managers, we don't really care that much about that because there's already a certainty, so we can plan and cater for that certainty. So risk management is then everything on the left-hand side. That risk management, should help organizations then identify all the key, and we can do something to management is able to achieve its strategy and its business objective by managing those uncertainties. So uncertainties can have positive consequences. So uncertainty is not necessarily bad, because uncertainty is just uncertainty. So it can have a positive consequence. So for example, if one of your competitor goes bad unexpectedly, then all their customers then can make your operations product. One of the uncertainties to happen, it will have on the revenue objectives of your organization. Uncertainties may also have negative collateral fire at a bank branch. Then the bank branch may all the assets may be destroyed or damaged, and then the bank branch may be shut down for the 2 years. So again, it's an accidental fire. It was an uncertainty, but if it was to happen, then there will be some consequences which will then impact our objectives. But most of the time, uncertainties will have positive and negative consequences, all positive or all negative. The answer to reduce the cost, so that's a positive consequence that we don't have to then give mobile devices and laptops to our employees, but then it increases the chance of the likelihood that they may introduce some malware into the bank's IT network. And then as risk managers, we will need to weigh the positive and the negative consequences of that uncertainty and decide whether we want to take that risk or we don't want to take that risk. So if the negative consequences are higher than the positive consequences, then we may say, no, we don't want to take the risk. But if the positive consequences are higher from a value perspective for our organization, then the negative consequences, then we may say, okay, let's take the risk. It's that the positive consequences outweigh, then we may be willing to take risks in organization. So let's try to practice then this concept where we take a objective as an example. So we are all working, let's say, for a financial services organization. We have, let's say, about 1 million customers, and we are introducing a new product, a new saving product for the market, and we want 20%, of the 1 million customers we have to be able to buy this product. So we want them to be able to, or we want to cross-sell this new product to our existing customers. So do you want to share a list of some of the uncertainties which, if they were to happen, will help the bank exceed this objective? So of course, we want to meet the objective, but hopefully we want to sell to more than 20% of our customers. So what would be some of the examples of uncertainties? So think about potential events which we are not sure about, and if they were to happen, they will help us to increase the cross-sell objective. So it's your time for participation now, so I'll keep an eye on the chat and I'll read out the comments once you've had a chance to digest and share on chat. Yeah, and I intentionally wanted to start with this because every time we talk about risk management, we all want to start about what could go wrong. But I first of all wanted to start by saying what could go right first, and then of course we'll go to what could go wrong. So any ideas? Okay, so we're getting some ideas. So product already in market, product match to customer needs. Okay, yeah. So if our customers want a saving product and the type of saving product we are introducing. So yeah, that's an uncertainty. We don't know whether our customers want the saving products. Do they even have money to save, or they don't have anything to save? Yeah, so that's an uncertainty which we will need to cater for. And if that uncertainty happens where there is a meeting of need and what we're offering, then that will help us achieve that objective. Okay, yeah, so I think Marina had a question today. It could be 20%. So we're just doing this for our exercise. We're taking 20%. But of course, yeah, we would like all our customers to buy that new product. Okay, and then let me just scroll up. There was one more. Okay, so there's something around unique selling point. Yeah, so so unique selling point from a competitive perspective, that if our product was somehow unique or different and superior to what saving products our competitors are offering, then that'll increase the likelihood that our customers would buy the product. People are so enthusiastic that they start to save more, consume less in the current new product. Yeah, so if something happens in the economy where which forces people to start saving, and then they start looking for saving products with better interest rates. So if something was to happen in the economy, yeah, so that's a good point. And pricing requirements, commercial view versus customer requirements, individual client objectives need to be evaluated, suitability check. Yeah, okay, so I think we get some good ideas then from what was posted on the chat. Yeah, so we're looking at basically uncertainties. So again, we're not necessarily going in risk management. We don't want to go and just start finding out what could go wrong, because of course, that is part of risk management. But we also want to make sure we start by helping the business identify all uncertainties, whether those uncertainties could have positive or negative consequences, because this is what the board and senior management, this is what they get excited about. If risk managers can help them achieve the objectives the board and the senior management is trying to achieve. They don't want senior managers to just come in, give them a list of everything which could go wrong, but then never balance it out with other uncertainties which could actually help the organization achieve the objective. Okay, yeah, and then we got some good points from Taha on the chat. So let's then extend this example. So something which should be now easier. So let's share all the uncertainties now which will stop us from achieving that objective. So we turn the tables now, and let's try to find out, okay, what if it was to happen will stop us from achieving our objective. Yeah, and of course, yeah, some of the points now could be reversed. So earlier we talked about economy, that yeah, if something happens in the economy which encourages people to, so in this case, it might be the opposite, where the economy is well, and people then do not want to save, they want to spend, and if that was to happen, then it might then impact our objective. Does not want to be bothered with further products. Yeah, so customers maybe they are happy with what they have. They don't want any more products. There may be some sort of disaster. Okay, that's a very broad word, Khalid. Uh, yeah, withdraw deposits due to liquidity issues. Yep, regulatory issues. Yeah, so if we sell our product and then it doesn't meet some regulatory guidelines or some regulatory requirements, then we may be forced to withdraw that product from the market, and then of course we will not be able to achieve the objectives. Okay, yeah, so we've got some good examples then on chat. So thank you very much for sharing those examples on chat. So that sort of is the key element, that when we start with risk management, the two important points here are objective, that we started with an objective because that's what our organization wants to achieve in order to grow and be successful. And then the other key element is the uncertainty. So we want to go and identify what are then the different uncertainties which will help our organization, or which could stop our organization from achieving those objectives. So at least in a broader risk management context, that is a key element I want you to take away, that we don't want to just talk about risk. We want to talk about uncertainty, which is then, a slightly broader concept than just risk. And then risk generally has this negative connotation, where it's just only the bad things which can happen, while uncertainty is a little bit more neutral. So it may help people sort of be more open when you're talking about identifying risks in your organization. So the key focus of any effective risk management initiative should be on identifying and managing uncertainties which may influence our objectives. So that should be the key, and that comes from ISO 31000, which is a international risk management standard. I think all operational risk management practitioners should be aware of these international standards, or widely adopted standards. So ISO 31000 is one of those standards which defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So it doesn't say that it's all bad things. It uses this much broader concept of uncertainty. So then let's expand and look at some of the common definitions we have of risk before we go and look at the definitions of operational risk. So here are three of sort of widely adopted definitions of risk. So ISO 31000, we saw earlier, risk is effect of uncertainty on objectives. COSO ERM, which is again a very widely adopted standard, especially within financial services industry, where it defines risk is the possibility that an event will occur and adversely affect the achievement of objective. So it's now focusing on adversely, where it considers risk then to be only things which can go wrong. So that's sort of one difference between COSO and the ISO 31000 definition. And OSEC, which is the Open Compliance and Ethics Group, it's another sort of global organization which has defined best practices for governance, risk, and compliance. So they define risk as a measure of the likelihood, timing, and negative impact of an event on the achievement of objectives. So again, they're focusing on the negative impact. So both COSO and OSEC, they're focusing on the more traditional way in how we have looked at risk, where we've always looked at risk from a negative perspective. And ISO 31000, offers a much broader definition, where it focuses on both the value creation and the value protection aspect. So it doesn't say that risk is only something bad. And this is one of the trends, that as risk management practitioners, we want to be aware of, that broadly, there is this shift going on where risk management traditionally was all about value protection, where we talked about getting the right insurance, having the right controls in place, and it was the objective was regulatory compliance. But organizations, especially board and senior executives, as they're getting involved, they're realizing that there is so much more risk management can deliver beyond just value protection, that they're also looking for risk management manager community to help them with value creation. So how can the risk management concepts help organization create more value and not just focus on value protection? So that's where integration, with decision making, achieving objectives, looking at risk, both from a threat and an opportunity perspective, that there is this shift happening where risk management, is shifting from just value protection towards helping organizations both value protection and value creation. So as a principle, then as a high level, these are some of the principles I use, where risk management, it's more about a way of thinking of how you can achieve your objective. So you don't sort of create the strategy of your organization and then think about the objective. We should be thinking about the risks, when we are defining our strategy. And then the second principle I use is risk management. It's common sense. So anyone, any consultant who tries to make it too complicated, that that is not right. That risk management, should be simple, and if it doesn't appeal to the common sense, of individuals within the organization, then maybe you made it too complicated for the various stakeholders in your organization. And then we talked about that it's not just about preventing and mitigating. We also want to focus on the uncertainties which could have a positive consequences on our objective. And then we are all managing risk, so it's because all those uncertainties are happening around us. So our only choice is, are we managing them consciously, or we are managing them unconsciously? So do we just react when things happen, or are we, sort of being more proactive in terms of identifying what those uncertainties are and making sure that we can, try and minimize as many of the negative surprises as possible, and we can maximize as many of the positive surprises as possible. So let's then drill down into operational risk. So we start with the broader sort of uncertainty, risk definitions. So let's then start with the operational risk definition. And I see there are some questions, so I'll try to take questions once we walk through the operational risk definition. So feel free to post the questions, and then I'll take them all together when we get to a logical breakpoint. So in this case, I've listed down here some of the common risk categories we may find in an organization. So credit market risk, are very well established risks for a very long time, but there are also strategic risks, reputational risks. There are also been a lot of focus in the recent years on liquidity risk. And of course, depending on which organization you go to, there are lots of risk categories which an organization may need to manage. So today our focus is, of course, on operational risk. So that's where we will drill down into for the rest of the session. So the most widely adopted operational risk definition is, of course, from Basel, which is where the discipline started, or it got formalized as a separate risk management discipline. So Basel definition defines operational risk as the risk of direct or indirect loss resulting from inadequate or failed internal processes, people, and systems, or from external events. Okay, so again, now you can see that there is an element of loss in the definition. So it's more aligned with the COSO and the OSEC definition, where it interprets operational risks as something which will have a negative consequence, but then it doesn't say negative consequence on what. So if you saw all the risk definition, they always pointed to objective. They always included the term objectives, while the Basel definition doesn't refer to the objective at all. So it just says, okay, go and find out all the bad things which could happen in your organization, which is one of the reasons why there has been ineffectiveness in terms of how organizations are managing operational risk, because you then go and just try to find out all the bad things which can happen, whether those things are relevant for your organization objective or not. Most organizations don't make that connection. So of course, this definition is coming from the regulator, so they care about the negative consequences. They don't want all those bad things to happen within financial services organization. But as risk managers, when we take this definition internally, we just don't want to take the definition as is. So we will take that definition, but we also want to make sure we change the definition so it is broader and not just focusing on the negative aspect of uncertainties. Yeah, and that sort of is what the next slide here highlights. That we want to comply with the Basel regulations, and we want to use that as a standard. But then our board and our senior executives, they're expecting that we would add a little bit more value than just complying with the Basel requirements, and they're expecting operational risk managers to also help them participate and contribute to the value creation aspects of the organization, and not just the value protection aspects of the organization. So if we expand that definition, so there are two sources of operational risk. So operational risk could come, or the source of the operational risk could be outside the organization. So those examples of that can be external fraud, where external fraudsters may steal data about your customer and then use that data to commit fraud on your customer accounts. Cybercrime, could be another example. Pandemic, could be another example where those operational risks will start from outside your organization, but of course your organization may have to bear the consequences of those risks, and then the objectives of your organization will also then get impacted if those uncertainties were to happen. But then a lot of operational risk also start internally, so the source could be internal. So examples there could be internal fraud, it could be process failures, it could be conduct risk, where our salespeople may be mis-selling insurance products or investment products to customers just to make the commission, even though that those products may not be the right products. So here are the three elements then, if we expand again that definition. So the definition talked about people, process, and systems. So from a people perspective, so that's a key element. And then because people then are everywhere in the organization, operational risk, pretty much then covers the whole organization, because if it covers all the people, all the processes, and all the systems, the footprint, of operational risk then is much wider than just credit risk or market risk type of disciplines. So in case of these three scenarios, we're talking about uncertainties where there may be inadequate people. So if we do not have resources, if we are a small bank, we cannot hire 50 IT security experts to prevent cybercrime risks in our organization, then that's an uncertainty we will need to manage, where because of the size of our bank, we just don't have enough IT security experts into our organization. Or in a larger organization, they may have security experts, but again, they may be behind in terms of using the right tools and techniques. So there may be failure, that even if you may have the right people, the right processes, and the right systems, they may fail due to various uncertainties. And that's what the Basel definition then focuses on. So from a people perspective, examples could be conduct risk, internal fraud, or employment practices, which cover things like employee discrimination, employee harassment type risks. From a process perspective, there could be disruption to your processes. There could be errors within your processes, or you may not have processes. So a lot of the processes may be just ad hoc rather than structured processes. And then from a system perspective, we could be looking at disruption to the systems. There may be errors within a system where maybe we are calculating the mortgage interest rate incorrectly for some customers. And then cybercrime, is of course a big sort of category of risks in that systems category. But then it's people, process, system. That's not everything, because when you're looking at operational risk, you want the remit is much broader than just people, process, and system. So what I use on my course is this diagram, which sort of tries to highlight then some of the broader concepts within an organization, where if you were trying to identify operational risk, then this diagram, the structure should help you at least point you to where you should go and look for operational risks within the organization. So I have some legends on the next slide because I wanted to put lots of concept on one slide. I had to sort of take some legends and put it on the next slide. But you're all going to get a copy of the slide, so you will be able to you'll be able to see what those mean. So I'll just explain the slide. I'll just explain the concepts from here, and then I'll switch to the next slide if needed. Okay, so if we start on the top, then we have a current market. So we're trying to sell some products and services into a market. The blue people are our customers, and then the blue P is our products we sell to our customers. So we may have existing set of products which we're selling to existing set of customers, and then the red people and the red P are the customers, and the products our competitors are selling because they're also selling to the same target market. And then the green people and the green people are basically then everybody who neither your competitor nor your customers are targeting. So they may be customers for future. So we want to highlight that because there could be operational risks or uncertainties in terms of that if somebody from the sales team wants to adopt some inappropriate or illegal practices to attract competitors' customer, then that may be a operational risk. You may want to have on your risk register because you could get into trouble with the regulators if somebody tried to do that. So that's where that starts. And then of course we have various channels. So we may have branches where customers can come and buy the products. We may have online presence. We may have financial advisors who resell our products and services. And again, there will be different operational risks across of those channels. So the operational risks you may have for a branch may be very different than the operational risks you may have if you have lots of financial advisors reselling your products and services to your customers. So you may also want to then use that angle to identify if there are any operational risks there. And then we have some customer-facing processes. So those are then the processes where we interact with our customers. So they actually get exposed to our organization through those processes. So the example could be sales, where if somebody wants a mortgage, then they would go and inquire about a mortgage, and the sales process is where then they will be interacting with the organization. So again, there will be some operational risks or uncertainties which would be relevant in those processes, and you may want to identify those as part of operational risk management. And then there would be some support processes which help with those customer-facing processes. So if we hand over some product collateral to our customer, there may be a support process where somebody is actually creating those product collateral, and somebody has to approve those product collateral. So there may be processes which are then supporting the customer-facing processes, and those support processes will also have their own set of operational risks. Then you have the business model, which sort of is supporting, all the customers and the channels. So from a business model perspective, that are you just selling mainly online, or are you selling mainly through branches? So what sort of business model have you selected? And again, each business model will come with its own set of operational risks. And then you have your organization structure. So how are you structured? That does all the decision happen centrally, or are you federated where different business units can make their own decisions? And then how much control is there? That is it more a centralized organization or more a decentralized organization? So depending on the nature of the organization, again, you will be exposed to certain type of operational risks. And then to support all of that, you have various resources, and now each of these resources are valuable. So that's why you want to consider them when you are looking to identify operational risks. So if I just go to the next slide, so we're looking at financial capital, we're looking at people, the skills and capabilities we have, the technology assets we have, the physical assets we have, and then of course the reputational asset we have. That these are all the assets then which are helping us achieve the objectives of the organization. So as operational risk managers, we want to make sure we identify all the uncertainties which could adversely impact these assets. And then if they were to impact those assets, then of course we will not be then able to achieve what we're trying to do as an organization. So that's the angle we want to take from an operational risk management perspective, that as many of these resources we can protect by managing operational risk, then that's what we want to do. So that's sort of all the resources angle, and then we have strategy processes where somebody then defines the strategy in the senior level or at the board level within the organization, and again depending on what strategy options they are selecting, those strategy options will also come with their own set of operational risk. So if due to financial difficulties, if the strategy is that we want to save a lot of cost and we want to outsource a lot of our operation, then that strategy will come with its own set of operational risk. Then if we decided that we don't want to outsource, we want to keep everything in-house, then that strategy will sort of have its own set of operational risk. So you also want to then see or make sure that from a strategy perspective, which strategy option the organization is going for, because depending on which option we go for, you will also need to then manage all the uncertainties around those strategy options. And then there are different drivers which are then driving the strategy and how we sort of go to the market. So we have sort of our mission and vision of the organization. We have a market opportunity, how big the market is. We have various resources we talked about, our past knowledge. We need to comply with some rules and regulations. We have a culture, so whatever we do then needs to align with the sort of culture we want to create in our organization, the level of innovation we want in our organization, and then also stakeholders. So what are the stakeholders expecting from our organization? That will also drive the strategy and the business model and the organization structure options we select. Okay, so this sort of gives a very high-level landscape of a typical organization, and if you were going into a risk identification workshop, then that's where this diagram can help, and it shows you that actually the operational risks you need to identify and manage are more than just what is implied in the Basel definition around just process, people, process, and systems. Okay, so and then the key element I wanted to cover on the left-hand side is then also the decisions that's a key element, which again in my experience with the operational risk management community, we do not necessarily tie operational risk management to the significant decisions which are being made in the organization. So most of the time, somebody already makes some decision and then we worry about the risks. But good risk management says that we should be talking about the risk before we make that decision. So we select the right option in terms of what type of risks we want to take, and that sort of is another key element which is emerging in terms of emerging risk management thinking, because every decision which is made in the organization will either introduce some new risk into your organization. So if you have if you're a US bank and you've never gone to China and you're opening some operations for the first time in China, there are going to be some new operational risks the bank would be exposed to. Or the decision may change the exposure of existing operational risks. So if you've never outsourced in the past and now suddenly you try to outsource, then maybe some of the risk exposures may change as a result of that decision. So this is another aspect we would like to promote, that operational risk managers consider, that they don't just wait for somebody to make the decision and then they start operational risk management. Operational risk management should be embedded within the decision-making process itself. Okay, so let's then do this quick exercise and then we'll try to take some of the questions. So I've listed about 8 examples here. So you just need to identify whether those would you consider those as operational risk or not. So let's do the first one, where if we have senior managers of Bank A, they pay a bribe to employees of Bank B to share confidential information about Bank B. So you can just say yes or no. If so, yes, if you would consider that as an operational risk. Okay, yep. So that's a no-brainer. Okay, Angelina's even tried to categorize it. That's nice. Thank you. Okay, well, what about the second one? So 15% of credit card customers default on their credit card payment? No. Okay, yeah. So because it doesn't fall into sort of the process. Nothing is wrong with the process. Nothing is wrong with the people or systems. So it's not associated with those uncertainties we talked about. So it would be more an example of a credit risk where we've given some credit and then we've taken the risk that some of the customers may not be able to pay. So it's definitely not a operational risk. It is a example of a credit risk. Then the third one, okay, so people have already started answering. So 2 million customers receiving incorrect information. Okay, so third one is yes, yeah, because that's where something has now gone wrong in our process, that we send these statements and either something is wrong in our process, or if we use an IT system to send that statement, there is some bug or defect in that IT system. So that's definitely a operational risk. What about the fourth one? Okay, so people have already started answering. So national political party calls on national site to which 2,000 employees are unable to travel to office. Yeah, so it's a yes. I think most people have said. So again, because it passes, those sort of criteria that it's related to our people, but then it's also that if people are not able to come to work, then the process will get disrupted, and then we may not be able to serve our customers on that given day. So it has that uncertainty where the impact will be associated or will influence the objective. What about the fifth one? The national political party gets elected and they make some policy decision, so maybe they nationalize some of the banks, which then devalues the currency. Okay, so that was a trick question. Yeah, so on the fifth one, it's not. So I would not classify that as an operational risk, because again, it falls into the market risk category, that if the exchange rates change, and due to which we are able to make less money or more money depending on the direction of that rate, then that won't necessarily be a operational risk. That nothing is wrong with, or it's not an uncertainty associated with people or process or system. It's an external factor, and then yes, it's an uncertainty. It will have some consequences, and it will impact the objective of our organization. So it is a risk we would care about, but it'll be more falling into the market risk category rather than the operational risk category. Let's look at 6. So people have already gone to 7. Okay, so 6 is intentionally missell. Yeah, so that's a big topic, at least in UK over the last couple of years. 7th one, salespeople provide wrong product information to the customers due to human error. Yeah, so somebody was, when they were writing that product documentation, there was an error. So we end up giving wrong information about our products to the customer. So yeah, that's again something it's either people, that if it was just a human error, then it's a people-related failure. If it was process, then it could be process-related failure. So it's definitely an operational risk. And the last one, 8, is bank releases an advertisement on national TV and radio channels which contain incorrect information. Yeah, so I think most of you are saying yes. So that's again, yeah, something has gone wrong then in our process, that somebody should have approved those ads before they were released, and so something has gone wrong in that approval process, where we've ended up releasing ads with incorrect information. Yeah, if it is, Khalid, yeah, you're right that if it is intentionally, if we were trying to mislead, then it would be a fraud. But yeah, if it was a more, that we did not really understand all the regulation requirements, so we tried our best, or people were in a hurry to approve the ad, so they didn't really pay a lot of attention, then it could be a process. It could be a process failure. Yeah, and Poonam, you're right. Yes, yeah, it could affect, because I think most of these risks, yeah, that reputation will always be a consequence of the operational risk. So yeah, you're right that it could impact reputationally. Okay, so let me just try to take some of the questions which were posted earlier from from Perry Han, I think there was a question. So is the operational risk embedded in all other types of risk? Yeah, so that's one of the questions. Yeah, so is operational risk embedded in all types of risk? So yeah, because in all type of risk, there are always some processes. If we have credit risk, then there may be a process to actually create those credit risk models, and we want to make sure that those processes are being followed correctly, because there are uncertainties, and if those processes are not followed, where credit risk models are not getting checked or not getting tested, then we may end up giving wrong credit to customers. So yeah, so I would say operational risk is embedded in across all the risks, if they are associated with people, if they are associated with process or IT systems, those other risk management disciplines are using. So that is definitely yes. Copies of the presentation, yeah, so they will be provided. You'll also get the recorded version, Marina, for that. Perian had another question. So does the positive uncertainty means we are looking for opportunity cost, missed positive opportunity? Not necessarily. So I think you are looking for the positive uncertainties because you also want, in some cases, to go and tell your board or senior management that we should probably be taking more risk, in these cases, that operational risk team, should not only be going to the board and senior management and always talk about things we should not be doing, or we should be taking less risk, but it's also balancing it out, that in some cases, if you think organization can take more risk, then that's why we want to identify those positive uncertainties, so we can also help our organization achieve the objective. So it's not necessarily to calculate the opportunity cost element. Okay, and I think those were the questions over there. Yeah, so keep the questions coming, and then we'll take those questions. All right, so we did the quiz. So let's then go into a little bit more detail on how do we actually now identify these operational risks. So we understand the definition. We are able to sort of differentiate that if somebody gave us an example of is this risk a operational risk or not, then we at least have some foundation knowledge to differentiate whether it's an operational risk or not. So let's now go into the detail of how do we actually start identifying operational risks. So I want to go back to this element of uncertainty, because uncertainty and objective. So those are, I think, the two key things that if you forgot everything from this course, just take those two things, that it's about uncertainty and it's about the objective of the organization. So we want to start with the objective. So I've taken a definition from ISO on what do we mean by objective. So an objective is a result you intend to achieve. Objectives can be strategic, tactical, or operational, and can apply to an organization as a whole or to a system, process, project, product, or service. And objectives may also be referred to as targets, aims, goals, or intended outcomes. So basically, what are we trying to achieve as an organization could be sort of classified as an objective. And something that definition does is it classifies objective into these three categories. So there are some strategic objectives, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So examples of that could be, if we're trying to achieve a certain level of profitability, certain level of revenue, certain level of return on equity, then those would be examples of strategic risks. Then we need some tactical objectives on how we are going to achieve those strategic objectives. So we may have to launch some new products. So we may have some objectives around that. Then we need to introduce so many products, and then those new products should make so much revenue. We may have to open operations in some new countries. We may have to acquire new customers. So those could be then examples of tactical objectives which help us then achieve the strategic objectives. And then you have the operational objectives, so that's where we're trying to make sure that, all the processes, systems, they're all, sort of running as expected. There is no major uncertainty which may cause disruption, to how our organization is operating on a day-to-day basis. So that's where you may have some objectives around continuity of operations. You may have some objectives around how quickly you want to resolve any customer complaints you may have. You may have some objective around IT system availability, that certain IT systems cannot be down for more than 10 minutes in a year, and certain IT systems, because they may not be that core, it's okay if they're down for a couple of days, for example. So you may have then various operational objectives. So the first question here is for the group is, are operational risks only associated with operational objectives? So you can try to answer a yes or a no to that. Okay, so I think most answers are no. Yeah, so it's not, you're correct, so it's not necessarily associated with operational objectives, because if we look at sort of the people, process, systems, those uncertainties can also impact strategic objectives. It could also impact tactical objectives. So these are the elements then we want to look at. So in this case, the diagram on the top, we have an objective, and around that objective, we will have different types of uncertainties. And then those uncertainties could fall into, credit risk, market risk, strategic risk, and then some of those will be operational risks. So now we are trying to identify that as operational risk managers, how do we help our organization identify those operational risk-related uncertainties? So when in terms of some of the criteria you can use is what I have listed down here. So let's discuss this, sort of as a group. So can you post, maybe some examples of uncertainties where if we design the process in a certain way, or if it is executed in a certain way, could influence our objective? Okay, so let's see if we can get some examples before I share my examples. Yeah, so we're looking at uncertainties. Yeah, so things which could happen in the future. And if they were to happen, they may have some consequences, and then those consequences will have an impact on our objective. So Poonam has said, yeah, second person check. Yeah, so if we don't have sort of approvals in the process, that if we are making, a big decision to buy, a IT system, for £5 million, and then if we don't have, right checks or right approvals, then that's not a good process. So that's one example of an uncertainty. Khalid, you've talked about system glitches, which we'll come to later on the IT side. So here we were referring to process, but of course, IT in a financial services environment, IT and process disruption is so tightly integrated that if there were system disruption, so if a process was completely automated and there was a disruption then to that process, then because there is no human element, that process will completely be down. But if there was a mixture of automated and human element, then maybe you can at least keep the process going. So that could be an angle where we can say that if a process is completely automated, then you are introducing that uncertainty that if something was to happen to those IT systems supporting the process will be completely disrupted. Okay, so we got some examples there. Let's go then to the next one. So continuity of operations. So that's where we're looking at uncertainties which may disrupt the continuity of operations. Yeah, so Ishwara said strike. Yeah, so if there's a strike called and then our employees are not able to come into the bank branches to serve the customer, we've got natural disaster, there could be pandemic. Yeah, okay, so those are good examples then of uncertainties which fall into that continuity of operation category. Then let's look at the third one, management of assets. So this is where now we have lots of assets in our organization which we need to support our processes and support our customers. And they can be tangible assets, like a data center, a building, IT systems. They can be intangible, like our reputation or the information we have about our customers. So what could be some of the uncertainties around the management of asset? So system upgrade. So something in the IT system goes, something happens with the upgrade. There is no backup of data. So if we lose some data and then we don't have any backup, then that's an uncertainty which could have severe consequences on our objectives. If there is a high turnover of our employees, so especially around the intangible, where if they have a lot of knowledge about our customers and we lose those customers, then we lose that asset. and that will have an impact on our objective. Okay, and then yeah, we've got fire as another example. Yeah, so if there was a fire, then our assets, our bank branch or our buildings can get damaged. Then let's go to the next one, human behavior. So what could be some uncertainties around human behavior? So fraud, yeah, is a good example where if somebody wants, whether senior executive or junior employees, they may want to commit fraud for personal advantage. There are mistakes, yeah, because humans can make mistakes, so there is an element of human error. If they're not committed, yeah, so that's a good one. That if they're not committed, then they may not care in terms of managing certain risks, because they could say, okay, not my problem. Okay. Then let's look at the next one. So human health and safety. So what could be some uncertainties around human health and safety? So we looked at earlier, pandemic, but we looked at pandemic more in the context of people not being able to come to work and the operation. But of course, pandemic also then has an element of health and safety, where if a large percentage of the employee population was to suffer from the pandemic, then yeah, we care about the operation, but we also care about our employees. So there is that element. Office space conditions, yeah. So if there is sort of a stressful environment where people don't necessarily feel motivated to come to work too, then that could also be an example, yeah, of health and safety, where they may then sort of adopt unsafe processes or unsafe practices, which may create hazards for employees at work. Okay, yeah. Then let's go to the next one, so development and operations of IT systems. So I think, again, we've touched this a little bit. So any uncertainties around development and operations of IT systems? Yeah, so we talked about system upgrade, that if we are, releasing some new functionality, if something goes wrong, then our systems may be disrupted. Integration across systems, there's change management. Yeah, so if we don't have proper change management when we are replacing some old IT system with a new IT system, weak security layer. Yeah, it's also good examples there. Okay, then let's look at the next one. So compliance with legal and regulatory obligations. So that's another area where, when we're looking at operational risk, what could be some of the uncertainties around that? Yeah, so there may be new laws here which may get introduced, and because they're new laws, we may not fully understand their implications, so we may not be sure. So that creates an uncertainty whether what we're doing, will comply or not comply with that new law. Maybe lack of training, that if our people don't know their compliance obligations, then that creates an uncertainty. There may not be documentation. Joining EU, okay. All right. Then let's look at the next one, which is decision-making approach. So what could be some of the uncertainties where the way we make decisions in our organization could be classified as operational risk? Yeah, so there may be some biases in terms of decision making. Yeah, hasty decision. Yeah, if we are sort of introducing changes to our products, so if we are changing, let's say, the interest rate on our mortgage, and if we don't sort of think about that properly and we just go and increase the interest rate by a big margin, then that may be considered unfair by the stakeholders or the regulator. So we make quick decisions. We don't think about the implication. Conflict of interest, yeah, is another example where there are people involved who are making the decision for their benefit rather than the benefit of the organization and its stakeholders. Yeah, and also decision-making approach itself is a process, right? So and process is then covered by the operational risk definition. So we also want to sort of look at that especially because it's slightly different, to your normal operational type process. But a lot of operational risks, they start their life in the process of decision making, because that's where, depending on how the risk discussions are happening, those decisions may then introduce or increase the risk exposure, which you don't want to worry about them after the decision. You want to worry about them while you're making the decision itself. Absolutely, yeah. Accountability also definitely the big one, Richard. And then the last one is stakeholders' expectations of fairness and trust. So this is where there are certain stakeholders who expect, a level of fairness. They expect a level of trust from our organization. So what could be examples of uncertainties where that could be broken, that we may break that expectation? So lack of transparency, yeah, that's a good one. That if employees expect that, if you're announcing a mass redundancy, you don't want to just suddenly announce one Monday morning. That there needs to be that element of process so employees know why those mass redundancies are being announced. There could be a lack of communication. That if we go and change the terms and conditions around our mortgages or credit card products for our customers without informing them why we are doing it, and they just suddenly see a charge on their credit card statement and they're surprised, then we've broken that trust element where we did not inform the customers. Yeah, so that's also a good example. And poor customer service, yeah. So if that's what customers expect, that we should be able to resolve their problems within 24 hours or 48 hours, and if it takes 2 months, then that's where we are breaking that level of trust. So I think those are some good examples. So these are then the criteria I would recommend we use, that when you are involved in identifying risk and you look at a objective. So against that objective, there will be lots of uncertainties. But if you only care about operational risk management or operational risks, then you can use these criteria to identify whether the uncertainties around that objective, are they operational risk, or are they credit risk or market risk, or fall into some other risk category. Okay. So I think most of you answered that question appropriately previously. So operational risk are associated with all the objectives, because for achieving all the objectives, there will be some uncertainties where they will be associated with people and process and technology and all the other aspects we talked about earlier. So let's try out then an exercise. So we have a bank where they are going to acquire another bank, and their objective is to increase market share from 10% to 16% through acquisition of Bank A. Okay, so that's an objective. So now we need to help, in this case, the bank identify all the uncertainties which would be classified as operational risks. And then I'll just go into my spreadsheet so we can actually capture some of this, so we can reuse it for later exercises. Okay, so I will let you pitch in. Okay, so I'll leave that text open on the top. So we want to identify, so that's the objective, that we want to acquire a bank, and then of course that Bank A has some customers, so we want those customers to become our customers. And if we are able to do that, that will help us increase the market share from 10 to 16%. So that's the objective, which is important for our bank. So what could be the uncertainties around that operational risk? So if I just write down the objective here, so increase market share from 16% through acquisition of Bank A. Okay, and then I'll just take you to the previous slide where we had the criteria, so you have that in front of you, so you can use that criteria then to identify. So let's identify about 6 to 7 uncertainties. Okay, so there are some examples here. Okay, so that's where it's starting. Okay, so I'll just make note of some of the example there. So if we are not able, so let's say we are unable to retain clients of Bank A, so that would be an uncertainty, yep, because then we will definitely not meet our market share objective. Due diligence not completed correctly. Okay, yeah, so that could be because due diligence then is a process. So due diligence on the customer base of Bank A, not, or yeah, we don't want necessarily to be negative. We'll just say the quality of due diligence, because then it can be good, it could be bad, so it could be either way. So yeah, we want to make sure that they actually have the customers they are saying, because if they're saying they have so many customers, when actually when we acquire and they don't have as many customers as they were saying, we may be able to acquire, but we won't get the market share. So the quality of due diligence, and because that's a process element of that acquisition, then yeah, that could be classified as a operational risk. If we lose the key employee after acquisition, so I'm just randomly taking from what we have on the chat. So we have 7 or 8 we can work with. So loss of key employees after acquisition. So yeah, especially if these employees are like customer managers or account managers, and customers sort of trust them. So if they leave, then the customers may also leave with them, and then we may not be able to necessarily retain all the customers. So there is the cultural barrier. So ability to align culture of our bank with Bank A. Yeah, so if customers were used to a certain way in which they interacted with the bank staff because of the culture of Bank A, and then if those customers start interacting with our employees and our culture, and then if they see a big difference, then customers may not like the changes they are seeing, and that may result in impact on that objective. Okay, so let's see. Compatibility. Yeah, so we can say compatibility of IT systems. So compatibility of IT systems. So that could be an example, because if all that customer information is stored in those IT systems, and if it ends up being very complicated to bring our IT systems together with their IT system, then we will never be able to sort of try and get a comprehensive customer view, and that may help us, or it may prevent us from achieving that objective. Specificity of the product the customers use to get from Bank A. Oh yeah, so that's also a good one. So change in product offerings. That if they were used to higher interest rates, on their saving accounts, or if they were used to getting some benefits from credit card products, and then suddenly the product offering changes in any significant way after the acquisition, then they may not hang around and go away. Okay, but out of here, so let's just go and qualify. So unable to retain clients of Bank A. Okay, but again, there are lots of things which will need to happen for that, and I think we've listed some of those things, and we'll come to later where most of the time, you don't want to just create a list of uncertainty. There is always a interrelationship between those uncertainties we need to understand, and we'll come to that. Okay, so I think there's some good examples there. So I think what we have here, it should work for the rest of the exercise we're going to get. So that then gives you an idea to sort of start with the objective. So, and then again, an organization may have lots of objectives, so you want to at least look at the key objectives and then use those criteria we had to identify the operational risk related uncertainties, and then that gives you your list of operational risk. So something I had to create internally here for our risk management was this tool called the Risk Identification Canvas, because generally when you're doing these risk identification workshops, if you get sort of 6, 7, 8 people together to help you identify all the right risk, it helps if you generally have a tool to structure the conversation. So rather than just asking them, oh, what keeps you awake at night, or what could go wrong, in our organization in the next 6 months or 12 months, it helps to create a structure around that discussion, so we can identify all the right risks in a structured way. And that's what I created this tool, which you can then also have access to, where the tool starts with key objectives in the middle as the starting point. So you always start with what is the objective we're trying to achieve, and then again, for one slide or sort of one screen, you may want to do one or two objectives. So you don't want to put all the objectives of your organization on one page. But the idea is to take one or two key objectives, you list them down here, and then you work out what could be the best potential outcomes in relation to that objective. So if all the uncertainties were to be positive, what would be the positive outcome? And then you list some of those positive outcomes. And if what would be the worst potential outcome? So if there were all the uncertainties with negative outcomes were to happen, then what would be the case in the worst case? So we list down a couple of examples there, and then you try and identify the various stakeholders who may be involved in context of that objective, because again, we want to make sure that we understand the trust and the fairness aspect of those stakeholders, that if those stakeholders could influence our processes, our IT systems, our people in a certain way, or they may be impacted in terms of the expectation around fairness and trust, then we want to identify those stakeholders. We also want to then identify some of the key assets or resources which are helping us achieve that objective. And then in the bottom half is where we are trying to then identify any key constraints or vulnerabilities we may have in association with that objective. So if our objective is to increase revenue, and one of the assets we have is, let's say, a CRM system we are using to keep track of our customers and give them marketing offers, then that IT system may have a constraint that it may only be able to handle, let's say, 10 million customers. So if your marketing is very successful and the number of customers goes above 10 million, then your IT system may not be able to handle those extra customers. So in that case, you may have some constraints around your assets, or there may be some vulnerabilities around those assets which you want to capture. And then again, there may be some constraints and vulnerabilities which may then be non-asset related. So there may be some processes may have a constraint that you can only handle so many sales inquiries on a given day in a branch. So we know that, okay, that's a constraint we need to be worried about, or we can only serve so many customers in a branch, at a given point in time. So if there were more customers who were to come in the branch, then they might have to wait in the queue for a very long time. So we identify some of those constraints and vulnerabilities, and the reason we're doing all that is so that we can then identify all the uncertainties, and those uncertainties are what then will become operational risks we can then go and assess and analyze as part of risk management. So let's try to use this tool then on one of the examples. So in this case, I will change the objective. So here we are having some financial difficulties, and we want to reduce our IT cost by 25%, where we have some IT operations in UK, and we're trying to now move majority of the IT operation from UK to Poland, so that we are able to reduce our IT cost by 25% in the next 3 years. So that is the objective the bank wants to achieve. So now we want to try and help or use the tool to identify some of the operational risks. So far, you were identifying the operational risk based on your understanding and your knowledge, but now let's make it a little bit more explicit so that everybody can see the thought process you may be going through. So if we take that objective, so I've listed down that objective, and let me zoom this a little bit so it's readable. Okay, so we have the objective here, which I have listed down. So can you ping me on the chat some of the best potential outcomes, or what would be one or two best outcomes, which if they were to happen, will help us achieve that particular objective, or will tell us that we were able to achieve our objective successfully. Cost savings, yeah. So if we are able to achieve, achieve 25% or more cost saving, that yeah, we wanted 25%, but if if there were some uncertainties which had positive influence on that objective, then maybe we may be able to save more than 25%. So it'll be nice to have that outcome at the end. Okay, so another outcome is that we are able to transition to Poland without any disruption. So while we are doing the transition, so one of the positive outcomes of achieving that objective, or we would consider it to be successful if we make the transition, but then our IT systems still keep running and our customers don't see any impact. Increase profitability. Okay, so it's an implied impact that okay, if we reduce cost, then it might help increase profitability. But let's focus then only on the objective we have here. Market share. Again, yeah, it's important market share, but I think for this objective, if you were to identify the operational risk, then market share may not be the right category to consider. Oh, transition in less than 3 years. Okay, yeah, so that's a good one. So one of the positive outcome may be that we are able to transition in less than 3 years. Okay, so sort of 2 or 3 outcomes will work for us, and then we have. Let's go to the worst potential outcomes. So what could happen where all the uncertainties were with negative consequences, if they were to happen? What's the worst outcome or outcomes? Okay, yeah. So we make transition, but the cost savings are 10% or less, let's say. Yeah. So that could be one of the potential outcomes. Takes longer than 3 years. Yeah. So transition takes 4 years or more. So yeah, if it takes 3 years and 2 months or 3 months, we may be fine. But if it takes more than, let's say, 3.5 years, transition takes 3.5 years to make, then yeah, that could be classified as a failure. Losing customers. Okay, so maybe we could use that the disruption example, that you have major system disruptions during transition, which may result in loss of customers and revenue. Okay, so that helps us then identify then some of the outcomes then we want to avoid. And you can already see here that with these examples we are already identifying some uncertainties. So one of the uncertainty then is system disruption during the transition. So as you are going through that thought process, if you come across then any uncertainty, then we want to capture that in that key uncertainty column. Okay, so we will say system disruptions during uncertainty. Uncertainty during transition. Okay, and then have you identified anything else? Make transition. Yeah, so we can say loss of customers, revenue due to disruptions during transition. Okay, so if we identify the uncertainties, we'll capture them there. But I think most of the other things are more outcomes. So if we are able to make the transition, then that's more an outcome rather than an uncertainty. So let's talk about some of the stakeholders. So who would be some of the stakeholders here who may either be involved in the processes, people, systems, or who may be impacted by? Yeah, so we've already identified customers, that we want to make sure we think about our customers. We have our IT, so our IT team in UK. We also have IT team in Poland. So those are 2 separate stakeholders, because if some of the jobs are getting transitioned from UK to Poland, then there may be different operational risks from an IT perspective, team in UK and in Poland. There is your senior management, yeah. So senior management, so they're making these decisions. So they are also a stakeholder. A risk team, compliance teams, yeah, so those would also come in place. Yeah, so risk team, compliance team would also need to come in place here because they'll need to make sure that we comply with all the rules and regulations, even though our customer data may be sitting now in a different country. Okay, we may have some project managers who are responsible for that transition. Okay, and now based on this, so the idea here is, do any of these stakeholders then help us identify any uncertainty? So let's, do you want to post some examples of, are there any uncertainties which could be associated with these key stakeholders? So I think we talked about sort of the UK team, that we may lose key IT employees in UK, or we can say a loss of key IT employees in UK, because for our transition it may be very important, but if certain employees are not consulted and they're not happy with this transition, they may leave, and then that'll create an uncertainty in terms of loss of knowledge, which may stop us from making that transition. Lack of knowledge, yeah, so lack of outsourcing knowledge could be an example. So that'll be an uncertainty where if we don't have that knowledge, then we may not be able to make the transition successfully. We talked about the customer, okay, but we talked about loss of customers, so let's introduce the customer satisfaction. So customer satisfaction due to disruptions during transition. There may be, so variance in regulatory or legal obligations, that we may be sort of compliant with some UK laws, but if we move our IT systems and data, then those changes, now we need to comply with different regulations, so that may introduce some uncertainties. Security, yeah, so security of customer information, yeah, because now we are actually moving data from one country to another, so that may introduce some security related uncertainty, and our customers may not be happy if with that change. So there is also that element of trust with the customers. Okay, so that at least gives you an idea that once you identify sort of those stakeholders, then we try and identify the uncertainties. Let's go and look at then some assets. So what are some of the assets or resources which will okay, so we have some IT systems we may have to move. We have, so project team is more a stakeholder, so we've covered, so let's cover the project team as a stakeholder. So law firms or internal legal counsel, okay, so those would also be all here as stakeholders. Centralized resources and applications. Yeah, so we have IT systems, maybe the information about customers in IT systems. So that would be then an example of an asset which may come into the mix. We may have these software licenses, for example, that if we now have to operate the software from some other country, we may have to consider those. Centralized resources, applications, equipment. Yes, okay, but IT system, okay, so we can have IT equipment, that if we have to move some IT hardware, then that'll be another asset. Our reputation, yeah, so that would be example of a asset, correct? Yeah, so our reputation, so that we want to make sure that we protect that during the transition. Reputation of the firm. Registration for companies to do business in Poland. So registration, so that's more a process rather than a asset, Marina. But okay, we may have to get a license. Yeah, so license to operate. So maybe that's what you were hinting to. License to operate in Poland, and that's an asset that without that, then we will not be able to operate in Poland. Okay, so then that gives us then an example of IT asset, but the idea here is, are there a couple of uncertainties we can add in relation to that IT asset? So what would be now some of the uncertainties around that IT asset? Yeah, so we talked about IT equipment, so we can say, damage to IT equipment in transition, that if we are, sort of moving all those physical servers, then we want to make sure they don't get damaged in the transition. So that'll be a uncertainty we will need to manage. There may be a theft of information during transition. You're talking about insurance. So not sure, Khalid, in what context you're talking about insurance. Vendor quality. Okay, yeah. So if in Poland we are actually outsourcing, let's say, to a vendor, so let's make that assumption then. So vendor in Poland, then that could be another uncertainty. So sort of the experience of the vendor in Poland to handle outsourcing. So that could be a uncertainty. Training, yeah. So we may have to training new employees in Poland. Yeah, that we may have to do some training for these new employees we have to hire, and that may create some uncertainty. There may not be any backups. That if something does go wrong, and if we do not have. Okay, so I think that gives us an idea then that we identify sort of the objectives, the best potential outcome, the worst potential outcome, the stakeholders, the key asset, and then at each transition, we sort of try and then identify some of the uncertainties. And what I found in this tool is that because we keep everything on one slide, it makes it a lot easier for everybody to see the complete picture. So rather than writing it on lots of flip charts and then you sort of lose your connection between the thought process, all of this, stays on one slide. So you can open this PowerPoint and then everybody is, sort of looking at all the assets and the stakeholders and the objective and what we're trying to achieve, not achieve. And in context of all that discussion, you identify the uncertainty. So this becomes a very effective way to make sure that we identify all the right uncertainties. And you have to try and restrict this on one slide. So that was also intentional because you only want to look at the important risks. So we don't want to necessarily go and identify 600 uncertainties. We only want to identify some of the key ones. So if you get more stakeholders than what we have here, then maybe you are thinking too much in detail, and then you want to keep the stakeholders to the space you have here. So you only think about prioritizing the most important stakeholder, prioritizing the most important asset, and that sort of will keep your focus. Where generally in the risk identification workshop, people go crazy, where they identify 400, 500 risks, but then out of those 400, 500, only 25, 30, maybe the important ones. So that's what we want to focus on. That we only want to identify the most relevant ones, because we do not have time and resources to manage all the risks, but we at least want to identify the most important ones. So we focus on those important ones and not get consumed by the noise. And by keeping the objective, as your focus, and that is also another thing where, then you don't try to necessarily identify all the risks, for the whole organization. You only identify that if we are looking at, saving cost, then we only talk about that. We don't talk about market share. We don't talk about revenue. We don't talk about profitability. We only talk about the cost saving objective for that one decision we are making in terms of moving UK to Poland. So it gives you that scope in terms of restricting and identifying the most relevant risk. So we don't have time to go into sort of the constraints and vulnerabilities, but that's where you can go and say that we can, if there are some constraints that we'll only get our license in Poland by a certain date, or if we only have so much budget to make the transition. So that would be an example of constraints you may have on asset or non-asset related. Yeah, so feel free to use this tool. So you'll get the links where you can download the PowerPoint, and then I'll send this version we've created. This version we've created, so you can also see the example we created during the course. Okay, so let's then come back to the course, and then we'll try to take a small break soon. So what we want to do then is that once you identify all those uncertainties, what you will see is that there are different relationships between those uncertainties, because all of those uncertainties may not necessarily be the main risk. That some of those uncertainties may be the consequences or the impact. Some of those uncertainties may be the cause of the risk. So once you've identified all the uncertainty, the next tool we use is the risk chain, where you try and say that, okay, what is the main event out of my uncertainty, and around that main event, what are the different consequences which may impact our objective? And then you list those consequences separately, and then if there are some uncertainties which are more the causes, then you list them separately behind the event. Okay, and then you sort of try to visually create that example. So let's go and create one risk chain, and then we'll take a quick break, and then we will resume. So we identified a few uncertainties then on our other PowerPoint presentation. So let me just bring that out. Now, so some of these uncertainties, so maybe let me take this on the next slide, so then we can create the chain. Okay, so what we want to identify here is we will always keep the objective. So let's take the objective, and we will sort of put it on the right-hand side somewhere. Let me just reduce the font a little bit. And now what we need to do is we need to now identify that which of these uncertainties are actually consequences which will result in us not, or which will influence that objective. So system disruption now on its own doesn't necessarily impact that objective. Yeah, and then loss of customers and revenue also, now it doesn't necessarily directly directly relate with that particular objective. But let's say if we take that objective where that one of the objectives we will then have from that initiative is to ensure high level of customer satisfaction during the transition. So that'll be then one of the tactical or operational objective which will come out of that initiative. And what we can do is then we can list some of these. So we can say the loss of customer, that would be then one of the consequences, that if that consequences was to happen, then that may impact this particular objective. So I will sort of take, and let's create and put that uncertainty there. So loss of customers due to disruptions during transition. Okay, so that's an example then of a negative consequence. So let's make that as a red. And then we are saying, so if that is a consequence, then there has to be an event which will need to happen, right? So sort of you move in that cycle where we started with the objective, and we're saying, okay, what would be some of the uncertainties here which would be consequences, which those consequences would impact those objectives. and then you try and look at those consequences and see which events will need to happen, which will result in those consequences. And that's where I think in our case we've identified this system disruption during transition. So that could be then an example of the event. And then we will sort of work backwards. So now this is the event we are saying in this case, because it has a negative uncertainty, we will try to prevent this event. But then what would be the causes? So now we need to work backwards, and we need to say that out of all the uncertainties we identified, what are the actual causes of that system disruption? So one of the things we listed here could be we had something around lack of outsourcing knowledge. Could be one example, that if we do not know how these outsourcing projects work, then that could become an example of a cause where we may make some assumptions and then which may then result in those system disruptions. Okay, let me just zoom a little bit. Other uncertainties which we can take here is maybe a loss of key IT employees could be another cause, that if we end up losing a lot of IT employees, then we may not have people to maintain those systems or upgrade those systems. So that could be another cause which could result then in that event. So we would want to then try and prevent that from happening. If we are able to prevent that, then we'll be able to prevent that event from happening. So you sort of, in this way, you work backwards and then try and identify from your objective that what is sort of the main event, because that's now then what we would capture as a risk within within our operational risk register or operational risk library. But against that risk, then we will capture the causes. That those are, if we are able to manage those causes, then we will be able to prevent that risk from happening. And then if we're able to prevent that risk, then we'll be able to prevent the negative consequences, and hence not let it influence our objective. So let's take a question here from Judith. Okay, so focusing just on one objective, what about risk to BAU operations of that objective? If just focusing on sole objective, could you miss uncertainties that the objectives will bring to other business objectives? Yeah, absolutely, Judith. Yeah, so I think we are only doing one objective because of the short time we have. But in real life, you would probably look at all the 5, 10 objectives of a business unit, because your objective itself may be conflicting, right? That you may want to increase revenue, but still reduce cost. And that on its own, having those objectives may then introduce some additional risk. So in real life, you will need to spend a lot more time than we are doing here. But that's where you can maybe expand on some of the objectives here. But then if you do it sort of one objective at a time, it at least gives you all the uncertainties. And what you may have to do then is when you try to create this risk chain, that's where you may see how the different objectives are impacted. Because if another objective here is that we want to retain as many of the employees in UK as possible, then you can see that in this case, what we've listed as a cause for this event may actually be then a consequence, for another objective. Yeah. So, but at least you get to see the interconnections between the different uncertainties, so that you can answer the next question is going to be, okay, how do I manage these risks now? And in order to manage the risk, you will need to see how these uncertainties are connected to each other. Because if it is a consequence, then maybe there is not a lot you can do about that. But if it is a event, there may be something you can do about that if you have influence over that event. And if that event will happen from various causes, then that gives you some pointers that, okay, if you manage those causes correctly and prevent those uncertainties, then you'll be able to sort of prevent that event. Okay, but the idea in real life, all these uncertainties will have lots of complex relationship with each other in context of a particular objective. Okay, but that sort of is the diagram. Then you can try and figure out that how for a given objective those uncertainties will relate. And then if you were using a operational risk software, then those events are the ones you will then capture as risks. And against each event, then you will capture the causes and you'll capture the consequences. But at least by using objective, you've identified the right one, rather than just saying, okay, what is everything which can go wrong? And then you end up with a huge list and then you don't know what to do with that huge list. But by using the objective as a filter, at least we're identifying only the most important and the most relevant one. And then of course you want to make sure that you pick the important objective. You don't pick you don't pick sort of the day-to-day objectives if they're not important. And if you only have limited time, then you want to pick the right objective so you at least will identify the most relevant one. Okay, let's get back then to our course content. So the last thing we looked at was the risk chain. So once you've identified all the uncertainty, then you try and sort of break those uncertainties into consequences, events, and causes. And then the next challenge for you is how do you now actually describe this risk? So something you want to avoid in terms of okay, here we're talking about categorization, so I'll come to describing. So here is around the categorization in terms of what categories can you select for those uncertainties. So of course, a lot of organizations have used the Basel categories, which I've put a hyperlink to the Basel document. But generally, you may end up with 70, 80, 100, in some cases 500 risks if you look at risks across all your objectives and all your business unit. And then, of course, you need some way of categorizing those risks. So the caution here I would like to highlight is that categorization is good for structuring the information, but it should not create the silo mentality within an organization. So if you create a category called, let's say, technology risk, and then say, oh, IT has to now take care, or they are the ones responsible for all the technology risk, then that may not always work because risks, doesn't know the boundaries between the different departments. So there could be risks which, may need to be managed outside IT, or their causes may be outside IT, but only the consequences may be in IT, or only the event may happen in IT. So you want to make sure that if you do end up creating categories, you don't, sort of say, oh, with this HR is going to look after this category and IT is going to look after that category, and then that discourages collaboration because organizations or different departments will need to collaborate on different risks because the causes and the events and the consequences may be sitting in completely different parts of the organization. So use the categorization to create a structure, but not necessarily to create silos and kingdoms around the risk. That collaboration will still need to happen. So what we've done in our operational risk library, these are the risk categories we've used. So we've sort of stuck to the Basel categorization. We just expanded some of the categories a little bit. So we have risks around improper business practices. There are risks around internal theft and fraud, business process failure, and external theft and fraud. And then I've listed the second level of category we have under those. And then we have technology failure and damages, regulatory and compliance, damage to tangible, intangible asset, employment practices and workplace safety, and vendor failure and damages. So those are the categories we have used to categorize the 125 risks the 125 risks we created. Okay, I just got a request to just ping this link. So let me just ping that link on chat. So that's where you will be able to see the Basel categorizations. Okay, so you should have that link in your chat. And you can also download, so if you want our Excel file with all the 125 risks, then there is the link here. So maybe I'll ping that link also on the chat. So you can go and then download the 125 risks and all the categorizations we have done, and then use that Excel file for your in-house risk library. Or if you already have a risk library, you can compare whether there are any differences, any gaps between what you may have and what we provide in our library. Okay, so the next thing, if we have identified the risks, then we may also want to go and identify any controls we may have already in place, because before we assess the risk and think about more controls, we may want to first think about what do we already have in place, because we're still managing risk, even though we may not have listed them or captured them in any spreadsheet or system. So in this section, we look at how do we identify those controls. So here's one exercise. So if you can help me on the chat with this. There are 4 cases, and there are 2 scenarios in each of the cases. So where do you think the uncertainty is higher? So in 1A, we are hiring 100 additional employees in the country where our bank currently operates, and in 1B, we are hiring 100 employees in a new country. Where do you think the uncertainty is higher in those 2 scenarios, 1A or 1B? Okay, 1B, of course. Okay, then the next one, launching first credit card product, launching the 21st credit card product. So 2A, okay. Bank wants to grow revenue by 2%, and in 3B, bank wants to grow revenue by 22%. Yeah, so the more you want to grow, the more risks you will have to take, so the more uncertainties you will be exposed to. 4A, 8 of the 10 IT systems are accessible by external parties. 4B, only 2 of the 10 IT systems. Yeah, so 4A, because that's where then you have more vulnerability that if those systems are accessible externally, so they can be hacked into by hackers. So then you have more uncertainty in case of 4A. So that sort of allows you to see then in which cases we have uncertainty, and really risk treatment then is everything we need to do to try and reduce the level of uncertainty as much as possible. So we may not be able to reduce the level of uncertainty to 0. So we will, but we can at least try and reduce it to as much as possible. And that's what then we need to think about a risk treatment perspective. So risk treatment is then a broader definition. So controls is what is used in the operational risk world, which is one of an example of risk treatment. But sometimes you may want to just take some action, and it's a one-time action. You don't need to go and implement a control in place. And if you take that action, then that will help you reduce the uncertainty. So if we are outsourcing from UK to Poland, and one of the uncertainties we don't have expertise in that type of outsourcing, then we don't need to necessarily put a control in place. We may just need an action to hire some experienced people who have done that sort of outsourcing in the past, but you wouldn't classify that as a control. It'll more be an action you take because you take it once, and then control is something you have to sort of do every day, every week, every month, and it's part of the day-to-day process. Or you may want to think about risk financing. So you may not be able to do anything about terrorism, for example. You cannot prevent that risk from happening. So there will be some risks where you can only minimize the consequence of those risks, and that's where you may have some actions or some controls. But then you may also have to get some insurance in place, or you may have to keep some reserves to recover from those events. So that's where risk financing then is also one of the risk treatment options. So I use the broader risk treatment term because that's what ISO 31000 uses, and controls is then just one part of the risk treatments. So basically, once you've identified all the uncertainties, you will then go and identify all the different risk treatments you are already doing to reduce that level of uncertainty, and then you can list those as existing controls or existing actions or risk financing you put in place, and then that'll give you a list of all your existing risks and all the controls you already have in place. So once we have identified all the risks and we have list of controls, then the next part is, now if we've ended up with 120 risks, now we need to know which of these 120 risks are the important ones. So what are our top 5, top 10, top 20 risks? And in order to identify what those top risks are is where then we need to do risk analysis. So risk analysis then is that next step where once we've identified the right risks, then by doing risk analysis, we will be able to prioritize the risk. So which risks need our attention, which risks maybe require more monitoring, and which risks are aligned, with where we expect them to be. So we may not have to do any more controls or do anything further on those given risks. So that's what risk analysis is. It's a way of now putting some sort of measurement on those risks we've identified, so we know which of those risks we need to focus on. So in terms of measurements, so here are some of the common measurements which are used for operational risk analysis. So some organizations use likelihood, so that could be how likely is the risk to occur during the defined assessment period. So we could say that, okay, if we're doing this assessment, that if our outsourcing is going to last for the next 3 years, then we could say we want to identify then all the risks for the next 3 years. But if we were identifying risk for a particular business unit, say that, okay, we are trying to achieve so much revenue in the next 12 months, what are all the uncertainties? And then once we've identified the uncertainties, we try to identify then the likelihood that based on what we know about that uncertainty, what is the likelihood that it could happen in the next 12 months? So you will have to define some assessment period when you are doing the risk analysis, and then your analysis needs to be restricted in that period we're talking about. Okay, so it's very important that when you're doing your risk analysis, you clearly tell or mention what is the time horizon of your risk assessment. And then you may create scales like this where you may say, virtually certain. So if we are sort of 95% or more certain that this could happen, then you could, say virtually certain or very likely or unlikely. So some of the best practices here is that don't use odd numbers in your scale. So I know 5 by 5 is very famous in most organizations, but sort of best practice and research has shown that if you use 5 levels, then people always go by default for the middle one. So if you have high, medium, and low, majority of your risks, will be marked as medium, and then you don't know, whether they are, sort of too medium high or are they medium low. So best practice is that try to define even number of scales. So either have 4 or have 6, so you don't give whoever is doing the assessment any middle ground that they will have to then take a position. And then also with each term, always define, always give some guidance. So when you're saying virtually certain, what is virtually certain? Is 90% likelihood virtually certain? Is 50% likelihood virtually certain? So don't ever just give, high, medium, low, or very likely, unlikely. That against each term, there should always be a clear, measurable information, so that there is no ambiguity, because something may be high for one person but may be medium for another person. But if we give them specific numbers, then we don't create any ambiguity around that. So there is a question by Khalid on who defines the likelihood scales. So maybe we can look at that when we look at the stakeholders. But it's basically whoever is defining the or whoever is defining the framework in this case, and it can vary. So if you're talking about operational risk for the whole organization, then of course it's the central operational risk team, which would be doing this. But if you were assessing the risk for a particular project, then maybe the project manager may define those scales. That if it's a small project, then his scales may be very different than compared to a larger project. So it really depends who is sort of driving that risk management process or facilitating the risk management process. But at least for operational risk for the whole organization, generally it's the central operational risk team who has that responsibility to define those scales. So some organizations capture likelihood, some organizations capture frequency, which is the other measure. So I like to capture both because they're both good questions. We need to ask, because we need to know that, okay, what is the likelihood of something happening in the next 12 months? But then we also want to know the frequency, saying, okay, if it could happen in the next 12 months, could it happen 2 times or 200 times in the next 12 months? So it's a question, right? So you have to decide as part of your risk analysis, what question are you asking about the risk, and the question, whatever question you ask, your answers will be then aligned, with those questions. So that's where frequency, I've given some examples in terms of very high, low, very low. Then you may also have impact or the consequences related scales. So there may be a financial impact where we may define very high, high, low, very low. And then again, we put some numbers around that to remove any ambiguity. Because we're talking about operational risks, some of our operational risks will result in disruption to our business operation. So you may want to have a scale to measure that level of disruption. So very high is where if your processes may get disrupted for more than 5 days, 1 to 5 days, and very low is less than 4 hours. Yeah. But again, every measure there is a number, so there is a number to sort of ensure that that ambiguity is not there. And then here are some of the other examples. So I didn't go and define all the scales, but here are some of the other examples I have seen in other organizations that when they are assessing their operational risk, then they may look at the reputational impact. So reputational can then be measured by how long you may stay in the news media. So if after an operational risk event, you may stay in the news for 1 week or 6 months or 1 year, then that can be used as a scale. And then you have legal fees, employee health and safety, employee satisfaction, customers impacted, customer satisfaction, vendors, regulatory fines, any regulatory actions which may happen as a result of that risk, and change in strategy where if a risk was to happen, if the organization gets banned from selling a certain product, then it may have to go and sort of look at its strategy and say, okay, what is it going to do now that it's not able to sell a certain product because of a certain risk event? Okay, so we have sort of these different types of impacts, and then you can define these different types of impacts, but then you don't have to capture these impacts for each risk, because depending on which risk we are looking at, some of the impacts may be relevant, some of the impacts may not be relevant. So for intentional mis-selling of products to clients, I've listed down then some of the impacts which may be relevant, where in that case it doesn't necessarily impact the vendors so much. But if we look at financial statement fraud, so in that case, there is an impact on change in strategy, which we did not have in the intentional mis-selling risk. So depending on which risk you are looking at, because some organization, they create 4 or 5 impacts and they say, oh, for every risk, you have to capture those 5 impacts. You don't have an option. And I think that's not the right thing to do, because if you ask IT people, saying, okay, if your IT system was down, what could be the impact on customer satisfaction? The IT risk owner may not know that information, so there may be somebody else who may sort of know that information. So we don't want to force the impact you are using, that for every risk you have to capture those impacts. We want to leave flexibility, because depending on certain risks, certain impacts may not be applicable for certain risks. And then some of the emerging best practice, especially in the cybercrime area, is because things can happen so quickly. I've also seen organizations starting to include risk velocity in their scale, so that basically captures how quickly could the risk happen. So like cyber criminals, they can come into your IT system and within a few minutes they can steal millions of data. So that could be all happening very rapid, where you may not have a lot of time to detect and respond to that event, while some things may be very gradual. So there may be a senior management fraud which may sort of go on for multiple years before it's identified. So organizations are also starting to look at capturing velocity of the risk, so how quickly could things happen, and then also capture the velocity of the impact. So if you have to pay regulatory fine, for example, as a result of an event, the impact, because if it's a big event, the regulator may have to investigate what has gone wrong for 1 year. So for 1 year, that impact will be dragged, and then you will not be able to sort of close out that event which has happened. So you can also look at how long the impacts of that risk could last, and then also use that to identify whether that risk is something we want to focus on. So I think, Hayden, this is probably what you were referring to. So let me know if I don't answer your question on this slide. So once you have sort of, the likelihood frequency or your impact and your risk velocity, now again, you don't have to capture all of those. So you can, have a subset of what I have there. But the idea of capturing all that information is that you somehow want to get to a level of risk, because with each risk, we want to know that whether this risk is high, medium, low for our organization, so we can decide whether we need to present that risk to the board, or should we not present it to the board or to our senior management. So this is where you then combine all that information you collected to arrive at a level of risk scale. And then that level of risk scale, again, an example is very high, high, low, very low. But then I have tied this with the objective. So you will only rate it very high if you think that the uncertainty can actually impact one of the strategic objectives of the organization, because that's what then the board and the senior executives, they would be interested in, that if we want to make 20% profit over the next 12 months, are there any risks which can significantly impact that profitability objective we are trying to achieve? And only those risks can be rated as very high. High would be where they impact tactical or operational objectives, so still important, but not as important as the strategic objectives. Low is where we are saying that, okay, we can tolerate that the risk may be that we may lose a lot of money, but it's still as we were expecting. So if you're doing, if you are in the credit card business, there will be a certain level of credit card fraud. But so far as it's within what is acceptable, then you can rank that as low. And then very low is where you're saying, okay, it doesn't have any impact on any of our objective, and then we don't need to do a lot of escalation around those. Okay. So the idea here is that you create your level of risk, which is then your final sort of one piece of information about that risk, but that is then derived from all the impact understanding and the likelihood understanding, and so on. And there is no magic formulas. I know lots of organizations, they try to sort of multiply likelihood by impact, or take the highest impact to arrive at the level of risk. You can do that, but any sort of formula will always have some pros and cons. So you just need to be familiar with pros and cons. So a lot of organizations who were using those formulas, they have reverted now to sort of using expert judgment, where somebody who knows about that risk will look at all the information which is available, and then that person or a group of experts decide whether that risk level is high or very low. Okay, so there is no magic formula there. Then the next thing you may also want to look at is that risk within our appetite. So this is where we have published a sample document, because a lot of organizations are in the process of writing their operational risk appetite statement. But because operational risk appetite statements will contain confidential information, no bank is going to publish that. So you will not get to see an operational risk appetite statement of another bank. So we sort of saw that problem, and what we did was we then took a fictitious bank, and then we said, okay, what would a operational risk appetite statement for that fictitious bank would look like? And it's about a 35-page document then, which we publish, and it's available free on our website, which you can download. So we won't get a chance to go into the details of risk appetite on this short course. But please do look at that example, and then we may organize a risk appetite related course later this year, and we'll inform you if you're interested in that topic. But where risk appetite would be relevant is here, where you would then also, so you will have your level of risk, which will tell you if that risk is high, medium, or low. But then it doesn't necessarily tell you whether it's within your appetite. So that's why then you need to capture another measure which says, okay, from an appetite perspective, how are we doing? So in this case, the scale may be that the appetite is breached, where you are outside your appetite. So if your appetite says that your IT systems cannot be down for more than 10 minutes at a given point in time, and because you've lost some key employees, or you have a very old IT software, now the likelihood that you will have a disruption of more than 10 minutes has increased, then you may say that, okay, that risk now breaches our risk appetite, because now we could have IT disruption which could last more than 10 minutes. So that's where you would say appetite breached, or it may be approaching the appetite breach, where we haven't breached it yet, but we're getting close to that. And then you have within appetite, which again I define two levels. So I say optimal level. So that's where if we are within appetite and we don't need to change anything, then we can call it optimal level. But in some cases, we may find out that we are within appetite, but we are actually very risk averse. So we have put a lot of controls in place. And that's why I created a separate category called very risk averse, because that's where you may want to actually take more risk, or you may want to reduce some controls because you may have too many controls in place and it may be costing us a lot to implement or have those controls in place. So by making the difference between within appetite, is that okay, or within appetite, we could either take more risk or we could reduce the controls we have and still stay within appetite. It gives us an opportunity, to sort of identify areas where maybe we are very risk averse in certain parts of the organization. So what you would get is a scale or sort of a heat map like this if you had done the level of risk, and if you do the appetite breach, and then at each intersection of those two nodes is where then you see some information. So this is now you can decide which risks do we want to escalate to our senior management and to board. So if the risk level is very high, and if the appetite has been breached, then those are the risks we want to then escalate to the board. Because remember, in some cases, we may have to take risks, to achieve our objective. So by default, it doesn't mean that if your risk is very high, we have to escalate to the board. We will only escalate that to the board if the appetite has also been breached. Again, this is different to most organizations I've seen, where organizations, define what needs to escalate just by the level of risk. So anything which is high or very high, they will escalate. But then you may still be within the appetite, because in some cases you have to take more risk. So that's what you will fall in the red area. Then we have the amber area, which is where we'll keep the board and senior executives informed. The yellow area is where we will keep only the senior executive informed. We don't need to go to the board level, and we will closely monitor those risks. Green ones, we are doing okay, so we don't need to do any further action. Blue ones are the ones then we are saying that, okay, we are within appetite, but we are very risk averse, and the risk exposure is also low, very low. So those are the areas then we can try and see whether we can reduce some of the controls in place, or should we be taking more risk in those areas. And then there are those two intersections here, which are very unlikely that you will a risk will be very high, but then you would say that, oh, we should take more risk if the risk is already very high. So some highlighted those as a gray area. So it's again one way of prioritizing. So lots of organizations, they do likelihood and impact, or you can do likelihood and sort of customer impact or operational impact. So there are various ways in which you can prioritize. But for me, the level of risk that tells you, what is the level of risk exposure, but in context of our objectives. And appetite tells me whether that is outside appetite or are we still within the appetite. And then I can make some decisions in terms of what to escalate if I have those two pieces of information. And then in some organizations, there is this difference in inherent and residual risk assessment. So inherent risk is defined in COSO. It's defined as risk to an entity in absence of any actions management might take to alter either the risk's likelihood or impact. ISO 31000 doesn't cover inherent risk. So there are two ways, to look at inherent risk assessment, where one example I've seen is the organization say that, okay, we have to assume we don't have any controls in place. While I've also seen examples where organizations say, okay, we will consider the controls, but what we will consider is that all those controls have failed. So again, you get to probably a similar outcome in both of those cases. So it's just a different way of thinking about inherent risk assessment. And what I find is the application 2 is at least a little bit more realistic and practical. That application 1, if you ask your risk owners to think about the risks, without thinking about any controls, then that may become a little difficult for some risk owners to think about a world where they have to imagine that no controls were in place. But application 2, at least keeps them in reality where they can still think about the controls, but they have to assume that, okay, all those controls have failed. and then that'll give them an idea of, okay, how likely is it that all our controls are going to fail in a given situation. And then residual risk is, of course, then what you reduce the level of uncertainty. So you start with the level of uncertainty, and then you have some risk treatment. So in this case, we have some controls that reduces the level of uncertainty to a certain level, and that's what then residual risk is. It's the level of uncertainty which remains after you have implemented all the risk treatments. In terms of looking at the controls, because to look at the residual risk, you may have to then go and look at all the controls you have in place. So again, something I've seen is organizations typically assess the design of the controls. Organizations assess the operating effectiveness of the control. And then as part of the control assessment, you may also want to think whether we need that control, because you may have a control in place for the last 10 years, but because you may have introduced some new controls over the last year, those old controls may not be as effective or may no longer be needed. So as part of the control assessment, you also want to take the opportunity not only of assessing the design and the operating effectiveness of those controls, but also to see whether we need that control at all or no. Yeah, so those are the two elements. And then here are examples of scales I have seen where organizations use fully adequate, partially adequate, inadequate, or red, amber, green, low, medium, high. And again, these are 3-level scales, so I don't like 3-level scale, but this is what I've seen in most organizations. So if I had the choice, I would either make it I would make it into an even number, so you don't get lots of ambers, and then lots of sort of border red and border green may be hidden in that amber color. So once we have done that analysis and we know it's sort of what risks are then important and what we need to escalate, then you need to sort of monitor what's happening with that risk on an ongoing basis. So there are various ways in which you can monitor the risk. So the two we are going to look in this section are incidents and issues and action plans. So again, there is a lot of confusion in some organizations when I deal on this particular topic, where what is a risk and what is an incident and what is a issue, that some organizations sort of use those terms interchangeably. But at least I want to provide sort of my clarity or my understanding here, and then you can decide whether that works for you or not. So in this case, we have a risk of disruption to online banking website due to technical failure. So it's one risk, but where our controls fail and that risk actually occurs in real life, then that's what we call as incident. So in this case, there is a risk. That risk happened on 21st Jan 2016, where our online banking website was down for 30 minutes. And then on 19th Feb, we had another incident, which is again related to that same risk. And then on 11th March, I had another incident. So I have 3 incidents where that risk has actually materialized or crystallized, are the terms which are used. So risk is always in the future. Risks don't happen. It's incidents which happen. But of course, those incidents are sort of manifestation of those risks. So for one risk, I can have lots of incidents. And then when if I investigate those incidents and if I find any problems I need to fix to make sure those incidents don't happen, then that's where we create issues and action plans. Okay, but I don't have to create an issue for every incident. So in some organizations, I've seen that every time an incident happens, they also create an issue. But then actually the root cause of all those incidents may be one problem. So you only need to fix that one problem. You don't have to create 3 separate issues, for each incident. So in this case, we have inexperienced staff is performing the IT system maintenance. So that's what we've identified as the problem of why those 3 incidents happen. So we create that as an issue, and then we have some action plans in place to make sure we fix that problem so that we can stop these incidents from happening. Okay, so that's where I've highlighted then the difference between those 3 approaches. So risk is always in the future. You will always have the risk. So incidents happen and then they stop, but risks don't happen. Risk is always something which will stay on your risk profile so far as you are doing business related to the context of that risk. But loss events are the ones which happen. So loss events, they have a start date, they have an end date. And then issues also have a start and an end date, but then you only define issues to identify any problems in how you're managing the risk, and then to fix those problems, we create action plans. So from an incident perspective, so this is also where most operational risk teams, they need to capture incidents within the organization. So the key elements I would highlight there is the purpose of incident is, of course, to learn, because if the incidents are happening, that means there is something not right with the way we maybe understand the risk or the way we've implemented the controls on that risk. So incidents are sort of pointing some problems in our understanding of the risk. So where that is the case, we want to make sure we learn from those incidents so we can improve the way we are managing the risks going forward, and where possible we can prevent those incidents. Of course, in some cases now we may not be able to do that, like credit card fraud is one example. So we'll always know that in a given quarter we'll have so many credit card fraud incidents if we are in the credit card business. So we may not be able to sort of bring the credit card fraud down to zero, but there may be then other incidents which are fully preventable. So at least on those risks, we want to make sure we are learning when those incidents happen, so there is not a repeat of those incidents. And similarly with issues and action plans, so we track and they have a deadline, so you have to fix those issues by a certain date. And if you fix those issues by a certain date, then you will make sure your risk management sort of continues to stay effective around that particular risk. And then typically internal audit, senior management, they may want then reporting on the issues in terms of how many issues do we have open we are working on. So you may also need to then include some information around issues and action plans into your operational risk reporting. And then the next example is monitoring indicators. So this is where if you have created that risk chain we talked about earlier, then creating the monitoring indicators becomes really easy. So if you have identified the causes for those events, then basically you need to now identify what indicators can we monitor around those causes, so that if those indicators go above a certain level, then we know that we have a problem and we can take some action and we can stop that cause from happening so it doesn't go as far as the event. So that can be classified as a key risk indicator. So any indicator which allows you to monitor a cause associated with that event. Similarly, you may have some indicators which will allow you to monitor the consequences. So if there is an event, if there are events which happen and it's the consequences is what we need to monitor, then you can also capture indicators against the consequences, and they can also be termed as key risk indicators. And then if you have some controls in place, then you can also have some indicators around those controls, and they can also be referred to as key control indicators, which you can monitor. So typically you would create those indicators against the causes or consequences or controls, and then you would set up some sort of thresholds. You would say that, okay, if this number is goes above this, then we'll classify that as amber. If it goes above a certain number, we'll classify that as red. And then you may want to define some actions saying, okay, what would we do if this indicator becomes amber? Or what would we do if this indicator becomes red? So that when it actually becomes amber or red, you don't have to scratch your head and say, okay, what do we do now? That you want to think about what would you do when that indicator goes amber or red, because a lot of organizations define the indicators, but then indicators become amber and red and nobody does anything, and they stay amber and red for a very long time, and then they quickly lose meaning, because then nobody looks at them saying, oh, that's been red for 6 months and nothing has happened. So you want to make sure that those actions are defined, and then those actions are taken. Otherwise, something is not right with the way you've defined your indicators or your thresholds. Okay, then the last section we look at is the different stakeholders. So who are the various people who are involved in operational risk landscape within an organization? So the first set of individuals are people who are responsible for managing risks on a day-to-day basis. So this is what you would call as the front line. So if there is a salesperson who is who is helping customers in the sales process, then they are the ones who are responsible to make sure that they do the adequate due diligence, on that customer. They ask for the right KYC document. So they are the ones who are at front line, in terms of managing that particular risk. So typically these people will not have the term risk manager, in the job title. So he may be a sales manager, he may be an account manager, or you may have a cashier, at a bank branch where the cashier has to make sure that if somebody brings a big suitcase of cash, she's suspicious and she does adequate due diligence to make sure that the, the, the individual there is not trying to do money laundering or commit money laundering related offense. So that's your first group of individuals who are actually responsible for the risk, but they don't necessarily have the word risk manager in the job title. So they're doing the daily job, and as part of their daily job, they are exposed to certain risks, and we expect them to sort of manage those risks. Because if they don't, then it might be too late for us to prevent those risks from happening. Then we may have individuals who are accountable for the risk. So these are then typically senior executives who will then take accountability. So they may not, again, be dealing with the risk on a day-to-day basis. So the head of the bank branch may be accountable, but he may not be dealing necessarily with every customer, or he's not dealing with every cash transaction which is happening in the branch. But he will be held accountable if something goes wrong. Then that's what becomes our second group of stakeholders. Then the third group of stakeholders we have is people who are then responsible for executing those controls. So if somebody has to take backup of an IT system, so that if something goes wrong, we don't lose any information, then people who are executing those controls can be then the control owners or the control performers. So that becomes our third group of stakeholders we need to have in our operational risk thinking. Then you have individuals who are responsible for defining the operational risk framework and processes. So this is the question earlier, I think Khalid asked about, in terms of who defines the likelihood and the severity and how we have to do risk analysis. So it's generally this stakeholder, the central group operational risk team. They're the ones who are then responsible for how operational risk will be managed, but they're not necessarily operational risk managers. So this is one of the dilemma of risk management, that even though the operational risk management team doesn't manage any risk, they're being managed by the first line on the day-to-day basis, they still have the job title of operational risk managers, and that may sort of create that perception, but the operational risk team is managing the risk, but they're not. They are just facilitating operational risk management. They're not actually managing any risks. Okay, but that's the nature of things at the moment. Okay, and then we have, there may be, in certain cases, there may be some specialized risk where the people who are on the front line may not have necessarily the specialist knowledge. So we may have certain individuals then who have that specialist knowledge, and they are then managing the risk, and they may then sit into a central team, so they may not sit within the business units. So cybersecurity experts, could be one example, that if we have a retail bank and a commercial bank, we won't necessarily have cybersecurity experts in retail and commercial bank. We'll probably have a central team, and then they will be helping both retail bank and commercial bank manage the cybersecurity risks. Okay. The next one is also something we've started to see over the last couple of years. There are individuals who are then responsible for independent testing of controls. So there are people who sort of may be assessing the controls, who are performing the controls. But in this case, the regulators have also required that somebody independently goes and validates that those controls are working. And it was done by internal auditors sort of 4 or 5 years ago, but in the last couple of years, it's been sort of transitioned where at least a lot of large organizations, they're setting up independent control testing teams within the operational risk group, whose job, full-time job is just to control testing. But in the smaller organization, internal auditors may still be doing this role. So it's again something which is in transition. And then the last group of stakeholders we have is then, there are individuals who have to provide independent assurance that we are managing operational risk correctly in our organization. So that's typically the internal auditors. that they need to give that independent assurance that everything is being managed correctly. There are no weaknesses in the way we are managing operational risk. And then you also have individuals who are responsible for integrating risk management across the organization and creating the risk culture. So your senior executives, your CEOs, your CROs, they are the ones who have to drive that message that operational risk management is important. We should be doing it, and we shouldn't just do it every 6 months. We should look at operational risk every time we're making a decision. So these individuals are then also an important stakeholders because they drive that culture, whether the first line and the business units will take operational risk seriously as part of their day-to-day job, or will they think, oh, operational risk is something we do once every 6 months or once every year, and then I do my day-to-day job. So these individuals then have that responsibility to drive that culture. So people are managing operational risk as part of the day-to-day job and not once a year. And then, of course, board and the board-appointed committees are important stakeholders because they are the ones who will then define the appetite, and they would say how much operational risk can we take, and then everybody has to then manage the operational risks within the appetite defined by the board. And then if we go outside appetite, then the board and the board committees will need to see those escalations. So I think Khalid, I pinged the first line of defense concept. So this is one way in which it's highlighted. So generally, it's the 3 line of defense which is used. But I think if you look on LinkedIn in different risk management groups, there is a lot of criticism on the using 3 lines of defense because you also want the board and the senior executives as your line of defense. So there are some experts now who are saying that we should be talking about 5 line of defense and not just 3 line of defense, because the board should also be in that line of defense, and the senior managers, they also play a very important role. So I've just sort of classified then all those roles we looked at into the first line. So those are then the people who are doing the day job, and as part of the day job, they are exposed to various risks, and then we want them to manage those risks and then manage those controls. Second line is then the group operational risk team and any specialist team and any independent control testing. Third line is then your internal auditors. Fourth line is then your senior management, and fifth line is the board. So then you have complete visibility that if something is wrong, you can see where that if people are not taking operational risk seriously, maybe something is wrong in our fourth line where our senior managers are not, that when they make big decisions, they are not considering operational risk. They're making decisions without considering operational risk. So then that encourages that culture that, when we are making key decisions, we don't have to worry about operational risk. We can make the decision, and then the operational risk team will take care of all the operational risk after that. Then maybe that's where the problem may be, or it may be in the fifth line. The problem may be. So you want to look at sort of all the 5 line and not just the first, second, and the third line of defense. Okay, so then let's try to summarize then all the topics we've learned. So we looked at both value protection and value creation. So Basel definition only talks about value protection. So of course, we want to comply with Basel, but we also want to help our organization achieve our objective. Operational risk team is not regulator employees sitting inside the bank. Operational risk team are bank employees, and they also need to help the bank to see where operational risk can create value for the bank and not just protect value. Then we looked at the concept of uncertainty. So uncertainty is something which could happen. We're not sure whether it could happen or not. It'll have some consequence, and then that some consequence will influence our objective. So that's what we start identifying. And then we want to make sure that we don't just identify risks once a year, but every time we're making any big decisions, we are changing the operational risk profile. So we also want to consider operational risk as part of those big decisions. Then we looked at the strategic, tactical, operational objective separation, and then operational risk again is it exists around all of those objectives. Then once we've identified the uncertainties, we looked at the concept of risk chain. So how can you start organizing all that information in a structured way? And then you do your analysis, so you can then find out what your top risks are and which risks you are doing okay on. And then we looked at the concept or the difference between risk issues and issues and incidents, and what is the difference. And we then looked a little bit into incidents, issues and action plans, and KRIs. And then the last topic we saw was around the stakeholders. So that brings us to the end of this course. I want to just highlight now some of the next steps you can take in order to follow up from this course or continue your learning journey from this course. So the first thing, if you are interested in receiving the soft copy of the slides, then please do send me an email on my email ID I have highlighted here. I'll be happy to share the slides from the course with you. If you have completed this course, then one of the benefits you have is a 3-month free subscription of Risk Spotlight portal, which is one of the web content offering we provide, which provides details of news articles updated on a daily basis on 125 common operational risks. So I mentioned this at the start of the course. You can use the content within the portal for doing your risk assessments or when you are developing your scenarios. So please do take advantage of this benefit. You can send us an email at portalsupport@riskspotlight.com, and then we will make sure that your user account is set up and then you receive the details to enjoy your 3-month free access to the portal. I would just like to highlight one more time about the cause for which we are doing this initiative. So please do go to the link on this slide and donate, an amount of your choice so that we can raise £10,000 by end of 2017, for the Save the Children charity. If you're interested in continuing your training journey, then please do look at riskspotlight.com/training. So that's where we will publish a list of any future courses on our training schedule, and you can register for those training courses from that link. And then another resource we provide on our website is at the link highlighted on this slide, where we have gone and identified about 100 good quality risk management videos, and we've categorized those videos by 21 common risk management topics, and this is available on our website for free. So please use this great resource, which is available for you to continue your learning journey. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for your attention and support on this course. We look forward to your further participation on other courses we conduct in the future.